Hey guys, and welcome to the next episode of Down Tune Dissection. And today's going to be a different episode where it'll be just me, and I'm going to be talking about the album that really got me into metal as a whole, and basically just talking about how I went from listening to some more simple rock until next thing you know, I was hard into metalcore and just obsessed with the genre as a whole and how that progression happened to me. So stay tuned.
What'd the devil give you for your soul, Tommy?
Well, he taught me to play this here guitar real good.
Oh, son, for that you traded your everlasting soul?
Well, I wouldn't use it.
So for me, I would say that I don't 100% remember exactly how my love of metal came about because there were a lot of factors. My dad has, since the days of Kiss and Van Halen, listened to all sorts of that hair metal of the era, and he actually really loves that stuff. Kiss was one of his favorite bands for a really long time. So for me, growing up, I heard a lot of that classic rock, but also there were other bands that my dad was into that he would just have on tapes and CDs in the car, and we would listen to them, on the way to run errands and stuff like that. And because my mom, she listened to a lot of country music and some hair bands as well, but maybe not as much. A lot of country music and a lot of like oldies, 60s, stuff like that, 50s, Elvis. She's a big Elvis fan. And so from her, I would say the influence into classic rock and metal was not as huge. But in the case of my dad, being that was a lot of what he listened to, especially around me, it made a lot more of an impact. So all of that being said, he found a band before they were even signed. He had actually just converted to Catholicism, which is how he found out about this band, because he wanted to kind of look into some Christian rock that was popular at the time. And so, he listened to a lot of the popular people, especially there was like POD and stuff like that were not quite to where they had their Satellite album that made them super famous, but they had some other stuff that was popular, and bands like the OC Supertones. But there was a magazine back in the day, this is really going to make him sound kind of old, but there was a magazine where it would have a sampler of all new Christian artists that were unsigned each month. So the magazine would come with the CD when you got it, and it would be a bunch of unsigned artists with their demo singles, and you could just listen to it and hear what all these new bands that were trying to make a name for themselves were all about. And one of the songs that he got on one of these CDs was Rhyme Animal by Thousand Foot Krutch. Before they had ever even been signed, before they came out with their first album, Set It Off, he heard that and he knew that he liked that band, so he kind of kept an eye on them. And when they finally did release Set It Off, he bought that and played it on repeat constantly in the car. So I remember hearing that album all the time. And as far as rapcore albums from the late 90s go, I actually think it's a pretty good album. It's, not the strongest of any of their albums, that's for sure, but it has some really cool songs and some really good elements to it. But a few years later, in 2003, is when they released their second album, Phenomenon. And that, even though I'm sure a lot of people listening don't agree that it's some amazing album, the nostalgia for me really makes it what it is. And it was an album that really drove me to want to listen to more of this type of music where you had driving guitars and torn vocals and that rock that really grabs at your emotions and gets you pumped up. That's what's interesting to me about any of these sort of hard rock albums that preceded me getting into metal. So even though this isn't a metal album by definition, at least not in my opinion, I think it's really just within the realm of being hard rock. I think that still there's a lot of good songs on this album. I think that it's pretty well put together, and I think that it's one of the few albums for me that's perfect. I know that, that seems like, oh, okay, how is that even possible? Because there's always something you can improve. But for what it is, I look at an album and I take it for what it is, because sure, you could always add and change different things into ways that you want to see them. And I guess by definition, there is no album that's specifically perfect for any person. But for me, taking this album as is, I think that it's perfectly well executed, especially when you consider, when it was released and the fact that they were still a really young band, Thousand Foot Krutch was at the time. And I understand that maybe the popularity for Christian rock isn't really there for a lot of people. But that aside, I mean, I don't think that you can say it's a bad album or there is no redeeming qualities to it whatsoever, because Rockfist, being the single off of this album, the biggest single off this album, was pretty popular. I knew people that were not religious whatsoever that had listened to the song and liked it. And Thousand Foot Krutch has a pretty big following still to this day. They aren't as active in releasing albums as maybe they were in the mid to late 2000s, but still they have a presence, and I think that they still drop some good stuff. And especially in the case of Phenomenon, an album that stayed with me for years and I still get so much enjoyment out of, I think that it's pretty cool to just look back and say, okay, let's trace how I got into the darker, deeper, more intriguing bands that are out there. And I certainly don't have much love for mainstream music anyway. I think mainly because a lot of it just doesn't ever hit home the way that more fringe albums will. I mean, sure, everyone listens to August Burns Red at some point, and they're still amazing, don't get me wrong. And, you'll always have some Slipknot and Avenged Sevenfold and all of these. You could go on naming bands forever, but none of those really hold my interest for very long. You have some songs that'll stick with you and you enjoy. I mean, especially in my opinion, Avenged Sevenfold is a huge sellout. I don't really think that they make the music that they used to. I think that they went much more into the pop vein. I mean, obviously, yes, it's not straight up pop. It still plays on your rock radio stations or Spotify playlists or whatever the hell, but it is not really what it was. I don't think they try to disguise it. I think that they're out here being honest. This is the music that we want to make because it makes us a lot more money, and we're far more popular when we don't scream as much and we don't make as distressing of a song. So taking all of that into account and realizing that, okay, Thousand Foot Krutch are never going to be the most popular band, and a lot of people will probably automatically dismiss them just because they have operated as a Christian band for the entirety of their career, and for whatever reason, a lot of people just automatically assume that means that their music is of a lower quality, or they always talk about God and Jesus and, trying to push religion on other people. But that's not really about, that's really not what Thousand Foot Krutch is about. They definitely have Christian influences that you can hear in their lyrics, but at the same time they talk about very relevant issues, and to kind of bring it into the relevance of the album I'm talking about, Phenomenon. If you look at the single quote unquote slower track on this album with This Is a Call, you get a song dealing with that feeling of loneliness that everyone gets at some point in their life, where even though you know everyone around you cares, you still are just not feeling that love from other people. So dealing with a relevant issue like that, it just shows that they're not here to preach all about religion and extol virtues of doing what they do, because, again, I'm not even a part of the same denomination as them. It's not like you need something pushed down your throat. Nobody really wants that. You just want music that you can rock out to. And that's what you get with Phenomenon. I 100% think that you get impressive music in this album. So just to kind of talk, let's move into what are some of the standout tracks to me that I really enjoy. And that would be, I'll start off first with Phenomenon, because just the way it starts off the album, the way it kicks off the album with the chugging guitars and the way that he's like melodically chanting, singing these lyrics, and you kind of just get a sense of you're going headfirst into an album that just transfers track to track and only slows down once, and every other time it's going to be, all dropped riffs and chugging guitars, like I said. And then you get, you don't necessarily get as much variation in the drums. If I were to make one criticism on the album as a whole, is I think that their drummer, Steve Augustine, I think that he maybe doesn't have the most variation in his fills and in the beats that he's using. It's not like he's out here doing blast beats and stuff like that, but you don't really expect that, I guess, from this band or even this genre as a whole. So, and then, you have Joel Briere, who I think he has enough of a presence on the bass guitar throughout the album. It's not, Getty by any means, but he's still out there. You can hear him in the mix. It's not hidden or anything like that. This isn't And Justice for All or some ridiculous thing like that. And Trevor McNevin, here's the thing about that, his insistence on always recording the in-studio guitar and then never playing it on tour, does that kind of make for a feeling of, okay, it feels a little disingenuous overall, but I understand that the three of them are Thousand Foot Krutch, and that's how they want to keep it. And whoever's along for the ride on the tour, it's not like, again, Trevor McNevin is out here doing the most complicated, irreplaceable solos or anything like that. It's not like trying to imitate Jimi Hendrix or anything. It's relatively simple overall. And that almost works to its benefit, because when you compare it to a 3 Days Grace of the time and bands, Breaking Benjamin, bands like that, it's on par with those other bands, Chevelle, etc. It's on par with those same sounds of the early to mid 2000s driving riffs. That's really, you're looking for a riff that hooks you into the song, and then you get your harsh lyrics, or rather you get your harsh vocals with whatever, anthem lyrics that are within, and that's what you're listening for. You're not looking for, no one was like, oh, 3 Days Grace is so amazing because Adam Gontier has like the best vocals ever, and they're just like, they have the most complicated solos and riffs, and the way that they change from dissonance to, like their time signatures and all of that. No one's like, oh, their time signatures are so amazing. So, and that's why Thousand Foot Krutch falls into the same vein. And I think it really does depend on who you grew up with, because I have a buddy, my friend Matt, he is a huge 3 Days Grace fan, especially the stuff that was made before Adam Gontier left. And he fully admits, because he's listened to Thousand Foot Krutch a little bit too, he found them while he was on deployment in the late 2000s, and that's how he became a fan of them. But he always said that they don't, in his mind, compare to Thousand Foot Krutch because they're better, because that's who he was a fan of first. And it's exactly how it is for me with, Breaking Benjamin or Chevelle or any of those other similar bands, is it's all in who you listen to first, I feel like, and who you get that nostalgia for in the first place. And that's a huge reason why Phenomenon, to kind of loop it back around to the track I was talking about, that's why Phenomenon sticks out for me, because it was always that first riff, just how it chugs right in. And it was one of the first riffs that I learned how to play on a guitar as well. So that nostalgia that comes along with that song is a huge reason of why I love it so much. And then New Design is a really interesting track to me. I like how it kind of breaks up the rhythm of the album. It has kind of a different sound to it. I used to listen to this album a lot while I was playing Project Gotham on the original Xbox, and that song would come on all the time, and I loved it. And it just, the way that the riffs flow through it, the way that they change, I really appreciate that, as far as like the differences that you get throughout it. Then just kind of skipping around on the album itself, because I'm not trying to like nail it down to any specific song, but Bounce being a more anthemic song as well. I really like that. And Rock Fist is the song that, if you know anything by Thousand Foot Krutch, that's probably the song you know, unless it's somehow something from their later albums. But I would say that was probably peak popularity for them for a while. And it's a really good song. I don't love it as much as maybe everyone else does, but it definitely has its own merits, its own qualities, and it definitely goes hard with those down-tuned guitars and the chugging riffs. So there's a lot to appreciate as far as that goes. And then if I were to talk about tracks that don't really appeal to me as much, it would be hard because I won't say I dislike This Is a Call, but sometimes I will skip it because it's slower. And if I'm at the gym, or just really for whatever reason, if I'm listening to this album, that's one that I'm okay with skipping, not because it's any worse, but just because I don't want to slow down and I don't want the album to ease up on me. But that's a personal preference, and it's nothing against the song. Really, it's still a really good song, and I still like it, but it's definitely not... It cuts up the album, because you're listening to Phenomenon, Step to Me, and Last Words, and so it's like, all right, you're 3 songs in, you're definitely pumped up, and then we're going to slow it down for a single song with This Is a Call, and then the last 8 songs of the album just go as hard as they possibly can. So to me, it's a weird placement. I think it always would be. I feel like they figured it out on later albums. It's good to, if you're going to put it in, put one at the beginning, one at the end of a slow song, or just at the end or towards the end. But breaking up the harder tracks in the early parts of the album, it just seems, I don't know, it's just not as conducive in my mind, because I want to keep listening and keep rocking out and I don't necessarily want the album to ease up at that point. I'm not there yet where I'm ready for the album to ease up, because of course that's what you do get with a lot of albums, where they don't ever ease up, and the album just kind of like, okay, it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. And sometimes that's when you get tracks that will lose you, and they kind of, towards the end of an album, they'll fall into the mix of the track list, and you don't really pay as much attention, because those first 3, 4, 5, whatever, you're listening really closely and you're rocking out. But then after that, you kind of get distracted and you're thinking of other things and you're doing something else, and there's nothing to break up the monotony on the album. And I'm not going to name names here for the sake of, keeping a focus on what we're talking about, but there's definitely albums out there that will slow down at just the right points, and you're like, okay, this feels right. I'm ready to kind of relax for a track and then get right back at it. So for Thousand Foot Krutch to do it a little early on this album, it's not the end of the world, obviously, because it's still really good in my mind, but it doesn't quite do what I want it to. If it were up to me, it would have been later in the album. But it wasn't, and they made it how it did. And basically, just to continue on, all I'll say is where this album stands in the, if anybody cares, in the pantheon of Thousand Foot Krutch albums, it's up at the top, definitely, because I have as much love as I have for Thousand Foot Krutch. I mean, these guys were a huge part of my early life and listening to hard rock and metal. So I keep coming back to their music for a reason, in that, yes, there's nostalgia, but there's also a lot of quality there, I feel like. But to clarify where this album is for me, I would say it's, if not my favorite album, it's like my second or third favorite Thousand Foot Krutch album, only because a lot of their more recent stuff has had a different feel to it. And I think that they're just showing their age, to be honest. Like, for me, I know, sacrilege of all sacrilege, but Metallica was never good after the Black Album. Their first 5 albums are incredible. I love basically every single song on those albums. But Load, Reload, Saint Anger, Death Magnetic, and whatever their most recent album was, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. I actually like a lot of songs off of Garage Inc., but anything after their Black Album, the Black Album, there's just not too many redeeming qualities for me. I mean, especially just to go off the rails just a tiny, tiny bit, there's a lot of Hardwired to Self-Destruct that pisses me off. I feel like it's such a horribly mastered album. Like, I don't understand how they can be one of the biggest metal bands of all time and they can't figure out how to master a damn album. Like, it's just so confusing to me. I don't know why their albums come out as just a big mush of, I don't know, like, loudness wars shouldn't even be a problem anymore. I thought we were past this. I thought we had figured out, okay, you can have some dynamic range in there when you're mastering an album. That way it doesn't all just sound the same, because literally Lars is so in the background and his drums sound so tinny and the bass is just mushed right up against the guitars. Like, you can't, there's no space, there's no sound stage there. It's all just compressed out the ass to the point where there's nothing even worth listening to. Yes, obviously they're playing really well. Some of the soloing on those songs is really incredible. But I mean, you can go on YouTube and this is getting so off track, but you can go on YouTube actually and listen to people that have remastered Hardwired and parts of and other songs off the rest of the album, and it sounds light years better. Yes, part of it is just they boosted up the bass on Lars's drums, but also they separated out the instruments and gave more air to the soundstage and kind of unmushed and compressed everything, and they kind of rebuilt it back into a structure that is pleasing to listen to, because it's like they went back to And Justice for All, taking out Jason Newsted altogether. That's almost what Hardwired to Self-Destruct is for me. So all of that to say, if Metallica can get tired and still be a good band, I don't see why Thousand Foot Krutch can't get a little tired. And they at least don't have the mastering issues that Metallica seems to have. Maybe it's just me feeling this way, but I really don't think so, because, in fact, I know it's not just me, because I see people on YouTube, like I said, remastering these songs because they agree that the mix just sounds like crap. So, you know, again, all of that to say, I can't blame Thousand Foot Krutch for getting a little tired and getting a little repetitive on some of their themes. But even their two most recent albums, Oxygen Inhale was their second most recent album, and they sort of did a double album, but not quite. They released Oxygen Inhale, which was like the first half of the set, and it had their lighter, more poppy songs, and then they came out with Exhale, which it goes a little bit harder, but still it doesn't quite get there for me. And so that's why I get the sense that they're getting a little tired. They might just be getting a little old, and they don't go as hard as maybe they used to, and they don't force it quite in the way that I feel like Metallica has been for decades. So, in 1991, that was the last time that they had something that I think really took the metal world by storm. And then they had a documentary about the making of Saint Anger, but really the only intrigue there is that they couldn't get along to save their lives. So, shocker. But for Thousand Foot Krutch, they haven't had all of that drama. And of course, comparing them to Metallica in a grand sense is just stupid anyway, because they're not even close in terms of what they've accomplished and how popular they are, and even quality of music. Obviously, I'm a huge Metallica fan, but you're just looking at how careers progress in different ways, and how a smaller band, arguably, and a Christian band, arguably, find a way to, avoid a lot of that conflict. But also maybe because of it, they just slow down a little, they retread a little bit, and, they don't find as much diversity as maybe some other bands do. Because, I think that what could have really helped them was bringing on another guitarist completely, permanently, instead of relying on Trevor to record everything in studio and then just bring someone on just to play on stage. No. It would be nice to have another mind in there helping to write riffs and solos for the guitars, because you would get diversity out of it. You wouldn't have the same experience every time. And to look at something that's a slightly more comparative, you look at Breaking Ben, who obviously broke apart because his band took advantage of him having cancer and made money off of him being gone, and just doing whatever they wanted as far as releasing content. So once they were out and it was just Ben, he put up a band around him that sounds and plays very similarly to what original Breaking Ben sounded like, which is good, because if you're a fan of the band, you don't want them to change completely. But at the same time, things were switched up. Jason Reich coming on from Red, that changed up a lot of how the guitar solos and riffs were written, and there's holdovers from it. You're gonna be like, okay, yeah, that riff sounds like a riff from an early Red album. And so what you're getting there, though, is something different. You still have that Breaking Ben feel, and you still have Benjamin Burnley's, kick-ass vocals, but what you're really also getting is something different. And that's what keeps it exciting, because you don't want all of your albums to sound the exact same. And I'm sure you'll probably hear me talk about Breaking Ben more, because there's so many good albums there. And I actually am a huge fan of Ember, their most recent release. But again, going back to Thousand Foot Krutch and going back to this album in particular and how it got me into metal, to finish out the story, because I'm sure I'll talk about this album as well on an upcoming episode, I listened to Thousand Foot Krutch and Pillar and all these other Christian bands, POD, and I kept in that same vein, right? But it was always my dad that was pushing me to listen to new music, because he's always been like that. He has always been looking for new music to listen to, and stuff that almost pushed himself outside of what he was used to listening to. He always wanted a new sound and something exciting and something different. That's how we both stumbled across August Burns Red. And that's why I will say Messengers is the album that actually turned me over to the dark side, in a sense, as far as metal and metalcore and, screaming vocals and growling and all of that goes, and blast beats, etc. That's the album that really changed my perception of music as a whole, and changed my appetite for, changed my taste as far as what I wanted to listen to most of all. But without Thousand Foot Krutch even starting a love of hard rock and grungy riffs, angry bass, and rapid fire drums, without that, you don't really get at the rest of it. Everyone has to start somewhere. No one immediately comes out listening to Amon Amarth or anything. You have to work your way up to that. No one's just going to listen to Meshuggah and be like, oh yeah, this is what I love. You have to start somewhere. There's something else that got you to that point. And for me, that was this album by Thousand Foot Krutch, which is Phenomenon. And it's phenomenal. Ooh, can I get away with that pun? I'm going to try to. I think I can. So you know what? That's where I'll end this episode. And go ahead and give me a dislike and a comment if you hated that pun. But you know what? Here's what I'm gonna. If you like that pun, I'm gonna ask you to go the extra mile and give me a like and a subscribe and a comment saying that puns and dad jokes are the best, because let's be honest, they really are. Even though they're really annoying, they still make you laugh, and there's just something about it that it's fun. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I had so much fun talking about really where my love for metal has come from, and also just a classic album in my mind. Obviously, no one's really going to have the exact same nostalgia that I do, even though I'm sure there are people out there that also listened to this album a lot when they were 10 years old. But I think it's just fun to look back at where we came from. And so actually, on that note, I'd like to also, in the comments, if you want to, go ahead and let me know how you got into metal. And if you're listening on iTunes or anything like that, just leave us a review or go find us on Twitter. You can find me at Clan McClellan on Twitter. Just send me a tweet saying, hey, this is, I got started by listening to Phobia by Breaking Ben or whatever. Actually, I know a lot of people that got into this kind of music because of Satellite by POD. So if that's what it is, then go ahead and let me know, because I'm interested. And if you have any album requests that you want us to talk about, that would be cool too, because I'm definitely down to hear what y'all have to say and what you guys want to hear me talk about. So Next week, I'm sure I'll be back with Chris Doman talking about something new. We have so many albums that we want to talk about, and there's a friend of his as well that wants to get on the show. So there's a lot in the works. We're going to make things happen for you guys, and I'm so glad that you guys listened. I really appreciate it, and I hope you keep coming back. And until next time, I'll see you in the pit.